Yay!
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 My favorite thing. Hey everyone, thanks for joining me in the new Nook space that I created. I am super excited to share it and the 5 games that I played this past week. So what I'd like to do is just start off with the easiest game and then progress through medium level and maybe a little bit more challenging games. This game takes about 20 minutes and it has the word lucky in the title, so you shouldn't take it too seriously. It is lucky numbers. So in this game, you are going to spend maybe 20 minutes and you're trying to create a pattern on a board in front of you. Your grid is a 4x4. And you're trying to make sure that the clovers you add to your board go from low to high. And that means from your columns to your rows. And in the very beginning of the game, to get everyone started, you just randomly draw 4 face-down clovers from the center of the board and you just line them up in that diagonal that goes from your top left to your bottom right. And you just order them from lowest to highest. So everyone kind of has a different starting position. Might be luckier than others, but there are ways to change your luck in the game. What you do on your turn is you just take a tile from the center. If it's face down, you look at it, and if you want to add it to your board, you can. And if you don't want to add it, you just place it back in the center face up. Now, the reason you would want to add it to your board is because it fits in your sequence of numbers. All of your columns and all of your rows have to go from low to high. So that means that when you place a clover, it needs to fit into that sequence somehow for a legal move. Now, when a player fills up their entire board of 16 and it's all legal, they win the game. So it's super easy, really fast, and you can play again right away just to make sure everyone knows what they're doing and how the game works. This is a 20-minute game and has a lot of luck to it, so don't take it too seriously. The next game I played, that is just a little bit more complex than lucky numbers, but definitely not as hard as the other 3 games I played this week, is Rule the Realm. This game is super interesting. So in Rule the Realm, you are trying to make connections on a plastic board that's in the center with a map inside of it, and you're placing these rubber bands. They're little teeny tiny rubber bands that are color coded for each player's color, and you're making these connections, essentially trying to rule the realm. You're going to explore and you're going to essentially gather up all of the resources that fit inside of the design you make with your rubber bands. Now, each map you play has a particular goal and or restriction, and that's where the game becomes more replayable and shareable with other people and scalable too, for a small group but also for a large group too. So the thing about Rule the Realm is you kind of play much like Ticket to Ride, where you either gather cards or you play cards. And so there's the central pool where you can take cards into your hand and you get 2 actions on your turn. So taking cards is 1 action. You could take more cards for a 2nd action, or you can also play down your cards in a configuration that expands your control over the playing area. This is a fast-paced game. It doesn't take a lot of time. Once you've learned the base gameplay and mechanics, you can play any of the maps and teach someone in no time. This is a fast game. It's not as fast as Lucky Numbers, and it has a little bit more strategy in it, so it's a lot less luck-based. Same with the Lucky Numbers. You can play this again right away, same board or a brand new board for a totally new experience. I haven't played a game like this before, so I think it's pretty cool. Alright, so in the 3rd game that I played this past week, you are brewing beer and entering those particular beers into competition. It is Homebrewers. Now, this also incorporates dice, and there's a whole lot of player interaction in this. This is a heartier game. This is definitely not a heavy game, but I'd put it right there in between kind of light and mid. You are designing stout and IPA and porter and all of these beer with these really interesting ingredients that you get to add to these different recipes. So there's also another interesting element to this that incorporates the dice. You roll dice and those dice have actions, and there are a multitude of ways to manipulate your dice, one of which is trading with other players. You can also re-roll all of your dice if they have all the same symbol, which is pretty cool because sometimes you don't want all the same thing. And so it gives you a chance to kind of re-roll everything. And then again, there are other ways, individual player bonuses and or just the change the pip action, which you can just essentially change the die to whatever you want for money. Once this trade phase is over, the action phase begins, and a player will essentially execute their entire turn buying cards, placing recipes, cleaning out your beer with the sludge so that you can actually brew more beer at a better rate, getting more and more points on this track, which is all about comparison to other players in the game. So there's this huge board where you are essentially vying for that first place position. And that's where a lot of that player interaction and competition come into play, because at certain points in the game, you are going to be judged on your progress in these 4 different types of beer. And at the very end, there's the big Oktoberfest, and you are going to be judged for even more things that you've been building up over the entire course of the game. This is a game that definitely needs to be played a time or two. The individual player characters are asymmetrical, and it might feel like they're out of balance or out of whack. They're not. I felt like that, and it just, you get to the end and the game was a 1-point difference. It was so close, and we had such different strategies and techniques in the game to develop those beer, those flavors, those profiles, and how we were earning victory points. It's worth your time to settle in with this game and to play it more than just once, because there's a lot here, and I think this is just a really good game. So the 4th game that I played this week also uses dice, and in a really cool dice worker placement way, with a fascinating, interesting board and a super cool theme. The game is Artemis Project. This is super cool. All the players are essentially running their own business out on the moon of Jupiter. And you have all these different character little meeples. They're colored meeples that you want because they do different jobs. And you also are placing your dice into these areas that will gather resources in a very unique way. So in a lot of the basic resources, what you're going to do is look at how many resources are available, and the priority goes to the pips of the dice belonging to the person who has the lowest amount, and they're divvied up that way. So if you put a high number pip trying to grab as many of the resources as possible, other players might sneak in underneath you and grab them all 1 by 2 by 3 before you get to them, and you may not actually get resources. So there's this balance of how many pips do you send to a location to gather as many as you can without tipping it over the edge where you're losing your investment. The board is divided into 2 parts. There's the above ground and then there's the underground. And I just think that's really cool. I think the way it's divided and the focus of mining and getting resources, which is underneath, is one aspect, and then the workers on top on the surface is another aspect. I think the Artemis Project has so much good stuff to it. I don't know why you're not playing it. Aside from the fact that it's a little hardier, it says on the rulebook about 75 minutes at the max. Do about an hour and a half for your first play. There's a lot to love about this game. You will enjoy the Artemis Project. So the 5th game that I played last week is a game that I would put right on the same level in complexity and theme as I would the Artemis Project. I just had to put one over the other one, and the reason that this game is my 5th game and the hardest game, it's also because I like it just a titch better. Like, I think they're both really good games. This one also takes up less space and has a really neat mechanic that's probably one of my favorites, and so that's why I think it just bumps it right above the other. The game is the Red Cathedral. So in this game, players are architects who are trying to build and decorate the cathedral, and they're also trying to gain influence in particular areas that obviously boost your turn. There's a central board though where you gather resources and take super cool actions, and that functions like a mancala, and that's one of my favorite mechanics. The dice that you move essentially go the distance the pips say, and then where they land is how many actions you get to take, the dice that are existing there. So if you move a die 3 spaces and it ends up where there is another die in the same spot, you will be doing that action twice because there are 2 dice there. And so once you're done with that, you pick up the dice and you roll them, and then those dice are going to change in number. That's cool. That's just like already really, really neat. So I appreciate the way that that board works. There's also an entire cathedral area where you are paying resources to gain ownership in that particular part of the cathedral. And then each spire or each column is going to be scored at the end of the game based on majority. And so you're competing with your fellow opponents to essentially invest in the cathedral pieces so that you get the most stuff in the biggest area. And you have your own player area that you are juicing up with all these different features that allow you to gain super cool moves. So when you move a die and you pick the 3 and you move it around to the space, you're essentially saying, I want this die, which is a particular color, to give me an action that's on my board because I have a blue die action. Do not be discouraged by the rule book. It might be 20 pages, but it's okay. It's teeny tiny, right? So it's still pretty hardy though. So that's why this ends up on my 5th game that I played from lightest to heaviest games. The Red Cathedral is a bit more complex and challenging than even the Artemis Project and previous games on this list. I think it's just heavy enough and complex enough and offers enough strategy for players with a little bit of dice rolling and luck with that mancala feature that it just sings for me. It makes me feel like I'm making awesome choices and I really like it. It's a nice game, and it comes in such a nice small box for what's in there. So cool. So thank you so much for joining me for the 5 games that I played last week. Let me know what you've been playing this last week. There are, as you know, a lot of games out there. So let me know in the comments below what you've been playing, and if you've played these 5 games or if they sound cool and interesting enough to join your game collection and or be played by your gaming group. I'll see you next time. Yay!
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 Yay! Yay!